happens to us all. Just like the sun will rise, night will fall. I know love is all I need. I know love is all I need. I know
Hi
love is all
guys,
I need.
as we witness this
That's all I know.
natural catastrophe hitting Texas and going to Louisiana, it's time to stand up and
An image I recall,
talk
a picture on
about
the wall
environmental
of
crisis
my mother
that we are
on her
facing,
wedding day.
and it's not
Young and
stopping
naive,
because we had the same
nothing
flood
up her
last year,
sleeve,
and
but the things that just got
with
lost
the
along the way.
Hurricane Katrina
I
2005,
know love is all
and
I
now.
need.
So
I
we
know
have to
love
take
is all I need.
position, be conscious about what's going
I
on
know love is
in
all I
many
need.
countries.
That's all I know.
I know love is all I need by Rodney Crowell, though I think the people of Houston need a bit more than that. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Renee Feltz, who, is from Houston, Texas. Renee?
Thanks, Amy. As we continue our coverage of the devastating floods in Texas, we're joined now by Naomi Klein, the best-selling author of several books, including This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus the Climate. Her latest piece for The Intercept is titled, Harvey Didn't Come Out of the Blue. Now it's time to talk about climate change.
Naomi Klein writes, now is exactly the time to talk about climate change and all the other systemic injustices, from racial profiling to economic austerity, that turns disasters like Harvey into human catastrophes. Naomi Klein joins us now from her home in Toronto. Naomi, welcome to Democracy Now! You have a message to the media.
Yeah, hi, Amy, and hi, Renee. It's really good to be with you, and I want to thank your earlier guest, Brian, for all of the tremendous work he's been doing for so many years in exposing the toxic risks and the unequal burdens of this extremely toxic industry. So, my message is this is not a time for some misguided idea of what is polite and what is appropriate about what we can talk about in the midst of a disaster. You hear this, from a lot of journalists that they don't want to politicize a human catastrophe by talking about climate change, which they know is a controversial subject, although it really should not be, especially in the midst of a storm that they're saying over and over and over again is unprecedented. I mean, you turn on any coverage and you hear that word over and over again, but what you don't hear, or you hear very, very rarely, is an explanation for why the word unprecedented, record-breaking, why these words have become, meteorological cliches. We hear them all the time because we're breaking heat records year after year. We're seeing record-breaking wildfires, record-breaking droughts, record-breaking storms because the baseline is higher. So nobody is saying that climate change caused this storm. What we're talking about are what are the superchargers of this storm, the accelerants that took what would have been a disaster in any situation and turned it into this human catastrophe. One of those chargers, one of those accelerants is climate change. Another, as we heard from Brian, is the presence of this highly unregulated, toxic industry that is so unevenly distributed, with communities of color bearing the greatest risks. Another accelerant is poverty. I mean, if you don't have the ability to organize your own evacuation because you don't have a car, then you're stuck. Another one is racism. If you are an immigrant and you want to get to dry land, but you're hearing that the border checkpoints are staying open everywhere where the highway isn't flooded, as we showed at the Intercept, then you are less likely to seek safety. So these are accelerants to a disaster that would have happened anyway. And it is the job of journalism, Amy, to provide key facts and context for people to understand their world. And without these contexts, particularly without a fulsome discussion of climate change, without hearing from people like James Hansen, who we're about to hear from here, then it seems like an act of God. It seems like it came from nowhere. And if that's the case, well, then we're going to avoid a discussion of what could have been done to prevent this, which is a very important discussion to have. And we're also not going to talk about what we can still do to lower emissions very, very rapidly to prevent a future filled with many more such mega storms and other climate accelerated disasters.
You know, it's very interesting. Certainly the media, a lot of the media is extremely critical of President Trump. He flew into Texas yesterday. Yes, there was a lot of criticism, but also they praised him for going there. But there was almost no discussion of him being a climate denier. If you watch the media, and I'm not even talking about Fox, I'm talking about MSNBC and I'm talking about CNN, almost 24 hours a day on Texas and on the tropical storm, the hurricane. Almost no mention of climate change, although they are devoting all of their time to this. You know, we don't have state media in the United States. But if we did, you have to ask how it would be any different. We know that the Trump administration has cleansed websites of the words climate change and global warming. But what about the media? Have they done the same, Naomi?
Well, effectively, they have. We are seeing this cleansing that is happening at the White House filter down to the media. And it is not just about federal politicians, it's also about state politicians who in Texas and Louisiana who systematically deny climate change. Now, if you are denying the reality that the earth is warming, then you are not going to prepare in the same way for what we are seeing now, for these unprecedented events. They will take you by surprise. If you deny the reality that the earth is warming and that humans are a major contributor in this, then you will just go ahead and rebuild the oil capital of the United States exactly how it was, as if there's no connection between this very industry that is being hit right now, as we heard from Brian, and the storm itself. If we did talk about it, we'd be having a very different discussion, Amy. We'd be having a discussion about what financial responsibility companies like ExxonMobil have for a storm like this. A company like Exxon that was doing its own research into climate change in the 1970s and publishing peer-reviewed papers saying it is happening, forecasting unprecedented events just like this, and then when the world got serious about lowering emissions, Exxon was a leader in spreading misinformation, doubt, lies about the reality of climate change. There is a legal discussion to be having here, and that's the kind of discussion that we need to have. The other thing that is so, you mentioned the fact that, of course, this disaster is being seen through a political lens, right? I mean, there's endless debate about Melania's ridiculous shoes. There's a lot of talk of the double standards between, how various Congress people voted to deny aid to Sandy-struck New York and New Jersey, and how they have their hands out now for Texas. This is all a kind of politics that fits inside this conventional partisan lens. So it is being politicized. It's just being politicized in a way that doesn't challenge the fact that the failure to take climate change seriously, the creation of an economy that is so profoundly unequal, and we see this exposed in a moment like this, has been a profoundly bipartisan affair. So that's a much more complicated discussion to have. But, think about what happens in the aftermath of a terror attack. These same politicians aren't worried about manners. They don't wait to get all the information before they blame an entire religion for a single bombing. They have no qualms about that. And I think, frankly, Amy, what we're seeing is a little bit similar to what used to happen after school shootings, when you would hear from the NRA crowd right away, don't talk about gun control, don't talk about guns, you're politicizing the disaster. And finally, about 5 years ago, people had just had it and said, you know what, this is exactly the time when we have to talk about guns. Don't tell us we can't talk about it when people are seeing the tremendous human cost. That's when we need to talk about it. And the same is true now about climate change, which is why now, we forget manners. This is about reality.
So, as I said earlier, is it time to talk about climate change because we've seen here devastated natural catastrophes who takes not just cities but states. And I'm here gonna read some of my book. I'm gonna read from my book, which the title is To Argue Logically or with Heart, Mind and Belief, and from the chapter Imperialism and Environmental Crisis. So, in many countries in South America, people have stood firm to denounce tyranny, racism, minorities, and women's rights, and the harm done to the environment, air, and water polluted by using toxic fuel. Huge corporations monopolize the world economy, endangering people's women's rights and the harm done to the environment. More recently, indigenous people have spoken out to stand for human rights against tyranny, racism, environmental justice, and war. As more and more people increasingly realize we live in a truly interconnected planet, all of Earth aspects from biosphere to soils and ocean to atmosphere form part of one interconnected living system with important cybernetic features. Thus, environmental responsibility in one place, such as the excessive burning of fossil fuels in the United States or China, contributes to negative effects elsewhere, such as to global warming in Australia. The Earth faces a massive environmental crisis with the potential to destroy the basic survival condition for human societies and those of many other species too within a century or two. Issues of ecological destruction as well as broader issues of social inequality and injustice gain prominence not by the actions of corporate executive but by the action of some 30,000 people, groups, and movements around the globe. These include environmental groups, indigenous movement, labor movement, health policy groups, feminist groups, anti-racist organizations, and anti-corporate groups. Such groups agree on many critical environmental and political economic goals. Berta Cáceres, a hugely influential Honduran indigenous rights activist, was killed in her hometown of La Esperanza in Tibuca. Cáceres was awarded the Goldman Environmental Prize after she led a peaceful campaign to stop one of the world's largest dam builders from pursuing the Agua Zarca Dam, which would have cut off the ethnic Lenca people from water, food, and medicine. So I'm talking here about what happened in Paris in a huge demonstration of thousands of people gathered to claim climate justice and to end nuclear wars. Beside the people, many governments held also a summit in Paris. Almost 200 countries from all over the world gathered to solve climate warming. On December 2015, the negotiation at the COP UN Climate Summit came to a final decision on the text they had been negotiating for years by signaling their assent to a 32-page document titled simply the Paris Agreement. Although not a legally binding treaty, the document gives the world its second global climate accord, superseding the 1997 Kyoto Protocol and replacing it with the global map for our climate future, agreed by all. So, climate change is a fact that we all have to face, and talking about it is first step to face it, and people had to take position about it. Moreover, without an international plan for justice, the lives of millions of civilians have already been lost. Their inalienable right to life violated. The dead also include millions of children and weak people, poor people who don't have enough tool and means to save themselves when the catastrophe is there. So the divestment movement seeks to stop investment in countries and corporations that continue to ignore climate change warning. Nevertheless, a major divestment demonstration in Paris planned for during the COP was banned in Paris. And government do not want the voices of the people interfering with the profit of big business, which pay for lobbyists and buy off politicians, a major factor in runaway global warming. However, although the Paris demonstration got blocked by the French government, the justice activist movement could not be stopped, and a major march took place in Washington, D.C. In 2015, as one report stated. On Monday, young people showed that they are building the kind of cross-movement alliances that we need to change what is politically possible in this country. This movement is broad, diverse, and powerful, and an epic demonstration of unity. 1,000 young people took to the streets of Washington, D.C. for justice on race, climate, and immigration. This mobilization brought together a truly unprecedented coalition. So, I'll go back here to continue position of a person, then I'll finish.
Well, Naomi Klein, I want to thank you for being with us. Naomi Klein, we will link to your piece at The Intercept as you give this message to the media, talk about climate change, best-selling author, journalist, senior correspondent for The Intercept. Her most recent book, No Is Not Enough, Resisting Trump's Shock Politics and Winning the World We Need. And we'll link to your piece at The Intercept. Harvey didn't come out of the blue. Now is the time to talk about climate change. As we turn to the world-renowned climate scientist, Dr. James Hansen. He's been called the father of climate change awareness. In 1988, Hansen first warned about the dangers of climate change when he testified before Congress. At the time, he was NASA's top climate scientist. He would go on to become the nation's most influential climate scientist. Dr. James Hansen, welcome back to Democracy Now! You come to us in the midst of this catastrophe, unprecedented, historic, apocalyptic. These are all words that can also be used to describe climate change, climate chaos, but those links aren't being made. Can we make those links?
Yeah, in fact, there are very clear links. Let me mention three of them. One of them is sea level. Sea level was stable for the last several thousand years, but with the beginning of changes in atmospheric composition caused by burning fossil fuels mainly, the planet is getting warmer and sea level has begun to go up because the ocean is getting warmer and because ice is melting. Well, on a global average, it's gone up by about 20 centimeters, which is about 8 inches. However, it's not the same every place. Along the east coast of the United States and the Gulf Coast, it's larger than the global average. It's a good foot. So that's a significant contribution to the magnitude of the storm surges that drive the water onto Houston and the other regions. So that's one thing. Another is the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere is increasing because the atmosphere is getting warmer. And therefore, the amount of water being dumped during these storms is larger because of the human global-made global warming, human-made global warming, which is now more than 1 degree Celsius. And the simple equations for how much water vapor is in the atmosphere as a function of temperature would be several percent. But in addition, the distribution of the storms that release the moisture is changing. We're getting more of the rainfall in extreme large events. So that's a significant factor. And then the third thing is the strength of storms. Thunderstorms, tornadoes, tropical storms all get their energy from the latent energy of water vapor. And because the atmosphere now holds more water vapor, the strength of those storms can be greater. And so there are substantial human-made effects on these storms. It's not debatable now. These are all well-established facts.
So what do you say to the...
So, as we heard, it's a human-made global change, and we have to stand and stop this, because these natural catastrophes, they're not from nature. It's a human being who causes them, who is still causing them. And with a human being, I mean the huge corporation, the fuel industry that only think about their benefits and making more money and destroying the nature. So we have to all stand here as one person to face this situation and to stop it. We can't go like that. We can't witness this catastrophe and do nothing. You all have to speak up, to stand for these causes and stop ignoring them. So we have to stand with those suffering from the consequences of climate change and the disasters it causes, ruining the lives of untold millions. And I didn't read all the chapter, but I'm calling you all to stand for these causes and go read all books. And if you could read my book as well, that would be good for you as well. And my book is on Amazon, Dr. Saida Seddik, To Argue Logically or with Heart, Mind and Belief. And one of the chapters I read today is Imperialism and the Environmental Crisis. I'll see you, and I keep my prayers for those who suffered from this catastrophe. I feel sorry for them. Thank you. See you.